Welcome, friends. My name is Melissa. This is my ministry partner, Andrea Bruce. She's joining us again. You guys like it when she joins us. I like it. I know they do.
Nice.
They're like, I want to see Andy more.
Wow.
So here she is, you guys.
My heart feels like a little
Loved.
Seriously, like mushy and melty inside. Like it got runny.
Seriously, Bruce, it got runny. How would you describe this angsty feeling that we're going to be talking about?
There's something that happens in women when we feel like, I think God's given me something that I didn't expect to step out and believe Him in. And here's the problem. If things with the vision, let's say, or the task that God's given us to do, if things go right and well, then we say, see, it was God. And if things go tricky, hard, if we struggle in it, if it feels bad, and if things aren't working out how we hope they do, we go,
forget it.
Guess it wasn't
I guess
God.
that wasn't God. So that's what we're talking about today. Let's start with that story that you told me, I don't know, several weeks ago about a woman who approached you at our church, Blue Ridge.
So I was serving at our church in this specific area, and there's a counter. I think service had started, and this young, tiny woman holding a baby, tiny, teeny little baby, just comes sort of approaching, but not stopping, and then kind of walking a little bit back and forth. And I thought, oh, she's just, of course, like carrying and walking her baby. But eventually she stopped and she asked me a question, and she said, I was just curious, and her voice was literally quivery.
I have that quivery voice when I'm nervous. I hate it. Yeah.
And her face was flushed. And you could see this woman was extremely uncomfortable to the point where I was like, whatever you ask for, I'll give it to you, because I wanted to just alleviate her
discomfort.
So she began to say, so I feel like God asked me to do something, and that is to gather young moms together in my house once a week, and we just pray for our kids, we pray for one another, and we read and study the Bible together. Well, Melissa, you know me. Now my antennas are all the way up.
Andy's all about this.
I'm like, tell me what is going on. How did this start? How are you doing? So she kind of starts sharing this story of God leading her to a place where she would say, and she did say, I felt like God was asking. God was making me do this thing. She's like, because I don't do this. I've never done this before. I don't gather women. I kind of didn't even really open the Bible with other people ever. Here's what she said. I feel like I'm supposed to invite more women into what God's doing. I don't know any. We've attended this church for a long time. Who do I talk to let them know what God's doing and see if we can invite other women from our church into my living room? The reason that this story stuck out, and the reason I told you this story and am now telling YouTube friends the story, is not because what I saw in her.
Oh, it's what it did in you. Oh. It was weird. Yeah. I remember you feeling like, as you were telling me, I'm like, what is this?
It makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
Right now.
I was like, what is it?
It's because what I saw in her was connection to God, God speaking to her and giving her something really intimate and precious. We might be tempted to be like, well, it's just gathering 6 moms in your living room. Like, what's so hard about that? And it's like, I don't think God sees it that way whatsoever. I think to Him, it's so precious because He saw her heart. But here's what happened. I saw my lack of connection to God, my lack of hearing from God. And I don't mean in a weird, jealous comparison, envious. I don't mean any of that.
But in a way that spurred you on.
Oh.
And I think that's what it's supposed to do.
It made my heart grieve. And it felt like from the Lord. Because I saw a woman, and I think she said that day, she's brand new at all of this, stepping out and hearing from God and obeying it and stepping out, and then using her little words to a stranger to try to communicate what God's done in her and is doing around her, and that I could see the fear on her face was, what if she doesn't believe it? I feel
what
so
if I look stupid?
It's just a little mom's group and all of these other things. But Melissa, I'm telling you, I had not stepped out. I had not heard from God. There had not been the connection with God that I was sensing from her. And it made me feel kind of homesick. I don't know, sad. Encouraged for her and sad for me.
So Andy, what I find really interesting, and I can like fully feel with this woman who we don't know, is when you talked about her having her baby and pacing up and down. I don't know if this was true, but I can imagine being in that situation and thinking, do I talk to this lady over here? Do I ask the question, or do I just keep on patting my baby and ignore it? And she, if that was what she's doing as she's pacing and wondering and probably praying like, God, do I talk to this lady or not? She made a decision, and then it's like the decision where you can't turn back. Like you open your mouth, and then out of faith, it's like, okay, I'm doing it. Even if my face is red, even if my voice is quivering, even if I'm nervous and I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, I'm doing it.
Let's talk about why don't we do that, Melissa?
I know for me, I will talk myself out of it as if I've just imagined it.
Why? What is that? Like, so keep going.
Because it feels too scary to step out and safer to not do the thing. Whether that's starting Bible Lab or having a conversation or approaching a stranger, it is safer to just stay in my own. Because I could be wrong and I could look stupid and maybe I'm going to damage God's reputation, and by doing the wrong thing. There's so much at risk, even in what seems small, gathering 6 women or having a conversation. There's like a relief of just being like, never mind. What I wish I could see, which is probably more true, is the risk of not doing it. I wish I could see and sense that, of not taking the steps to follow the Spirit and what I miss out on because of it, because I want to stay safe.
It's sort of like this really, really fragile and probably very slim, narrow.
It's almost like time window, don't you think?
Well, it's like the faith zone. Before faith has decided it's going to step, or even that it's not going to step, there's this thing. And my question is, what does that tell me about my actual perception of God?
Tease that out a little bit, because I don't know exactly what you mean.
Well, if I would prefer to save my own hide, it means I don't love God near as much as I say or I think I do. It means that I don't really trust God, that I'm far more concerned about how I look than about my place before God or my view of God. That really slim margin reveals a whole lot about our real theology. This space between when God's given some direction of like, and now do this, and the space between receiving direction and stepping in or out of that direction, it's real fragile. And what I did is watch this girl with the baby at our church do that in a way that I'm like, it's glorious, it's beautiful. And I could see her theology, her belief and her hope in God on display right in front of me. And it was not clean. It was...
Or comfortable.
It was a mess. You know what I mean? And yet I think God was like swooning over that girl. I have played that situation and tried to figure out, why is this so crystallized? What was it? What is it about that? And I feel like one thing that's resonated is this idea of recognizing her faith was in motion. And how often do I choose here to wait, having received some direction from God, and my faith is not yet in motion, but it can be maybe soon. And it's almost like I let the air out of my tires.
What do you mean by that? Like, what is that?
Talk myself out of it, bring logic into the
I'm just imagining
conversation. Yeah, tell myself it's not that big of a deal. I'll do that next time. or I know where they are with God, and I know that I feel like I know how it's going to be perceived and received. So give myself lots of reasons, letting the air out of my faith. You can't travel very well or far.
On a flat tire.
No.
Yeah.
So I have sort of gone back in my mind to this. It's a bit of a mantra. That might be an overstatement, but sort of like saying, the next time you will. The next time I will. It doesn't matter what God gives me. My answer is going to be, sure, do you want me to go now? Giving myself the script before the emotional turmoil, because that is what it feels like, hits, to be like, nope, I will, Lord, just so you know, I will. I'm gonna, and I'm not going to take the air out of my tires. I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to say, hey, God's given this to you. So what if it doesn't go well? C'est la vie, and you move on. I feel like watching her in that little faith zone that's super fragile because all your emotions are talking you out of it, but yet your soul knows what it ought to do. It felt like it gave me insight into the reality of my heart. That's not pretty, but also a real strong desire to like get going in faith.
Do you know what's interesting about this idea of faith and faith in motion? That when we look at it and see it, it gives us I think it can give us such a longing for that in ourselves. So not only was her faith in motion happening for her own sake and for her group's own sake, like whatever that means as she gets plugged in, but it did something in you. Like her living out her faith didn't just affect her and what she's specifically doing. It influenced you because that's what living out our faith does.
Wow. So you mean as we see somebody in that little fragile faith zone,
doing it and face turning red and voice quivering and maybe the hesitancy, that didn't matter. It actually maybe had you see the struggle in a way that was like, oh, she really feels this. And it did something in you.
Totally. Yeah, it felt like it activated even the dormant faith.
Which means I think what I'm saying is our faith in motion has so much more potential than probably we could ever see or know.
Holy smokes. Yeah, and we discount it big time. Like it's just that little thing. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I love what our friend Becky said the other day. Did you catch this? She said, I had built up my faith to be all of these big things and kind of big things and big things. And then the Holy Spirit spoke to me, this is what our friend said, and was like, no, it's the tiny, tiny, tiny little things. It's how you get your kids out of bed. It's how you pray for your neighbor real quick and just God help them. It's all of the teeny tiny things that we feel like are like, they don't count. They don't count.
And they probably count the most. And the reason I say that is because it's all those tiny things collected over a lifetime that actually make up our character.
Yeah.
Far more than the large things. I've been thinking along the same lines. We're involved, actually, both Andy and I, in this Disciple Makers. Is that what it's called? Listening to the leader who's leading my table, listening to him talk and really seeing his faith lived out in really small, quiet ways where I'm like, that's so doable. Where he'll say, no, I'm just looking for tiny places to have conversations with people, like really tiny things. And when it shrinks down to the everyday and the tiny, all of a sudden I feel like I could do that. Like I could, through the influence of this group, going to the doctor and sitting down, with the person who intakes you. Mm-hmm. Listen, how friendly am I?
Not typically.
Not at all friendly. And as soon as my butt hit the seat and I looked into her eyes, what this small group, this Disciple Makers, what we've been talking about, just like lit up in my brain of like, just pay attention. Just look at her as a human. And sat there for quite a while just chatting with her. It was really small. It just took being conscious. And the reason I was conscious was because of the influence that this circle has had on me, on how they live out their faith with other people in really tiny ways. It makes it doable.
Yeah. And I probably am the queen at being like, no, that doesn't count. Mm-hmm. I want the pinnacles. This is excitement. Now you've got me on all cylinders. But Melissa, you know who I am in my neighborhood. Like, the tiny stuff is kind of my jam though too. And man, to have the ability for my heart to have some more maturity, which means fixing its eyes on Jesus, to see not the pinnacles, but the people, the opportunities to just, I don't know, live my theology, to actually live in motion, like you're describing at the doctor, my belief about God, like in just really, really simple, enjoyable ways.
I think it's where I have like just a taste of like, man, I think this is where life happens. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As I continue to get healing, and I keep telling you, I'm like, I need to be around people and I want to be around people. And it's like, no, I think it's in these small moments that it really, really matters. Did we make any kind of sense in this conversation?
I don't know if we made sense, but my heart does feel like I want to just do the little things because I could get so laser zoned on what I deem bigger things.
So can we do this? Can we do this in the comments then? Will you just give us some ideas of what your little things, like your little steps of faith, what that either has looked like or could look like for you? And I think the more examples we hear of what little tiny steps of faith look like, it's like, oh, it could be that, or it could be that, or it could be that. So thank you, my friends, for joining us. And she'll be
Super
back.
fun.
We're gonna, we will do more. We had a lot of feedback from you guys, both on Facebook, in Patreon, Marco Polo messages, face-to-face, about this whole idea of opposite sex friendships, sexual attraction, boundaries between male and female. We actually have probably 2 or 3 or 4 more videos that we'll be doing over the coming months on this topic.
Yeah.
Which should be interesting. So anyway, I will see you guys next week, and she'll see you in several weeks from now.
Okay.
Bye,
see
friends.
you guys. Bye-bye.
Andy and I often have people comment on our friendship and how wonderful it is. And it is wonderful, but it can be very difficult. If you want to see us fighting, you can find that here on this video. I walk you through my thought process, which, spoiler alert, I was the one that was wrong.